Okay, the gray alien. Without going too much off in the deep end, I do want to talk about this phenomenon. And there is something I did find in mythology that may be this gray alien. Now, this gray alien, referred to as the Greys or the Roswell Greys or the Zeta Reticulans, are some sort of extraterrestrial beings that have come here, and they're pretty much messing with our DNA and performing experiments on us without our permission. This gray alien was made famous in the mind of people by a couple named Betty and Barney Hill. Now, it was a white woman and a black man that were married in the 1960s, and they claimed that they were driving down the road and they were abducted in 1961. And Betty was examined, and so was Barney. And these aliens, these grays, were also looking at her reproductive organs as well as Barney's. And she and him were told that they came from Zeta Reticula, and they were shown some kind of a star map. Um, Apparently, there was some kind of physical evidence on some of her clothing, but I don't think that was ever properly examined. But they, to my knowledge, are some of the first people out in the media and the public mindset to claim this abduction. Although in history, there's always been stories of succubus and incubus abducting people or doing things to them at night, and they're always seen as demons. Now, this tree called Yggdrasil in Norse cosmology contains the nine worlds that Nordic mythology talks about. And of these nine worlds, I'm just going to read them briefly. They seem to indicate different creations or types of beings. Um, the Midgard is where the humans live. The Asar is where the gods live. That would be the Cronides. The Vanir are where the other gods live, who were not Cronides, but intermingled with these Cronides. And from my research, they were blonde Nordics up in the Nordic area, like of Sweden and Norway. The Jotnar, who were giants, lived in Jotunheim, and they didn't seem to get along real well with these Cronides. So, to me, these would be like Titans or descendants of the Titans or other giant Caucasoid peoples. And here is the one that interests me the most, and it's called Altar, the land of the elves, or Elf Elfheimer, and it's also called Loselheim. It is the land of the light elves. Now, before I talk about this, let me just finish these worlds on this Yggdrasil. And then there is Helheimer, which is the land of the dead. There is a Swartelfar or Swartelfheim, which is the land of dwarfs, and they're called dark elves or dark dwarfs, which is a rather interesting characteristic. But they don't seem to have a lot of interaction. These could be the little people, but they were used by Loki to help with certain things. But I need to research them more. But that may be little people because they're called dwarves, not elves. And then there's Niflheimer, which is the land of ice, and Muspelsheimer, the land of fire. And the Nordic creation uh, story talks about the two regions, Muspelheimer of heat and fire, and Niflheimer in the north, full of mists and cold. And between them two interacting, that was what created creation. And then a living Jotun, which would be a giant, or Ymir, Ymir, appeared out of the melting ice. So they're saying that originally hot and cold combined and created this giant. And then it goes on and talks about his, from his left armpit, the first man and woman came. From his legs, the frost Jotnars were born. And his grandson, Bergelmeyer, came. And that this giant Ymir was fed on the milk of a cow called Udheimlar. And she licked the ice and released another giant called Buri. So there were, two giants, and then this Buri and Bor had three sons, Odin, Vili, and V. Well, Buri and Bor sound like Kronos and Rhea to me. Odin is Zeus, Vili and V would be Poseidon and Hades. Okay, getting back to these light elves. Well, first of all, an elf was considered a supernatural being in Germanic mythology and folklore. It was different from a dwarf. Dwarfs to me were just little people. So this elf, living in its own branch of this tree of life, had supernatural capabilities. And basically a lot of the Christian, Judeo-Christian tradition saw them as demons, not good at all. But going back to this Norse cosmology, in this Elfheim, they had these, well, they say elves and some say fairies, but they were supposed to be responsible for intelligence. And if you look just, quickly on Wikipedia for this Alfheimer, they talk about some of the Old Norse texts and the Eddas. And something that I find very interesting is this one part that says, in the 12th century Edict prose, Gif Fagin and Snorri Sturluson relates it is the first series of abodes in heaven. Okay, it says, that which is called Alfheim is one, where dwell the peoples called light elves. But the dark elves dwell down in the earth, and they are unlike in appearance, but by far more unlike in nature. The light elves are fairer to look upon than the sun, but the dark elves are blacker than pitch. And then it goes on, it says, it is said that another heaven is to the southward and upward of this one, and it is called Anlang. But the third heaven is yet above that, and it is called Wildblain. And in that heaven, we think this abode is, but we believe that none but light elves inhabit these mansions now. So I need to do a lot more research on this, but it's rather interesting that here we get into this third heaven stuff, which is something you get out of some of the pseudepigrapha, as well as the Nag Hammadi library starts talking about separate heavens. But yeah, I mean, these things are different than what a human is. Yeah, I do need to take some more research, or do some more research into this subject. They are something different, and traditionally today, elves are seen as like a smaller supernatural creature with pointed ears and some different facial features than an average human. So that tends to make me think this is something similar to those grays, and they're always shown as small. We also show them as Christmas elves as well. Now, what's interesting is on this Wikipedia, I found something called an elf cross, which is a pentagram, and it was used by Nordics to protect against malevolent elves and protect their cattle and themselves. So that is rather interesting as well. So this is definitely something that needs to be researched more. I'm not, one of those persons at this time that's ready to go out and say that these grays exist. I know there's a lot of thought that they're a government cover up or they're an experiment, and there may be some truth to that as well. But I'd have to see a lot more evidence of their existence. But the fact that this was mentioned as part of the tree of Yggdrasil and one of the worlds contains these supernatural beings called elves indicates to me that this is something else that was on the planet, because that tree Yggdrasil is basically a family tree, and it's showing you that there were different kinds of giants. There was the average human. There was these elves. There's a land of dwarfs, the little people, and then there's a land of fire and ice, which equate to the north and the south, and conditions on the planet, and it gets into different bloodlines as well of these giants. So there's something a little bit more that to this that really needs to be dug out. And as I go through, I'll be looking for it. But out of everything that I've gone through as my reading and my mythology, this Nordic mythology is the only thing that I've seen that comes close to mentioning the possibility of these gray aliens. The other the only other thing would be that the Nag Hammadi library that talks about androgynous beings. And I'll do a separate video on that down the road. But those are the only two um, pieces of writing I've seen that allude to this being. And it needs to have further investigation. So for now, that's what I have on these possible gray alien elf link relationship. Thank you.